Well, first we had Gen X, then we had Gen Y, and now we have a new generation, Generation Rent. How is elusive ownership for America's young people affecting their outlook on life? I'm Allen Barton. Stand by for the front page. Joining me in studio, Don Watkins, a fellow at the Ayn Rand Center for Individual Rights, and Terry Jones, associate editor for Investors Business Daily. With recovery fairly far off on the horizon, it would seem, the unemployment rate stubbornly over 8%, student loan debt topping $1 trillion. $1 trillion. 20 to 34-year-olds are renting more. They are renting apartments. They are renting cars. They are renting clothing. They want to stay flexible. They want to stay fast on their feet. Terry, does this mean anything positive or negative, or is this just a business opportunity for those like Zipcar and these new companies that actually will rent high-end clothing to you for events that you might need good clothing for? And you know, is it a business opportunity or is it a trend that's negative for the economy?
I don't see it as a negative trend. I mean, it may be a result of a negative trend in the economy, but I see it as a positive trend because I think young people are making rational decisions based on what they see as their immediate future. And right now, let's be honest, things do not look very good for them. The job market is very weak. Their starting income for a student fresh out of college is $3,000 below where it was in 2006. So it's not a very propitious time to be buying a lot of stuff and loading up on goods when you may not be employed in 3 or 4 months. So it's a rational decision, and these companies are merely taking advantage of it and giving people who can consume their goods more choices.
Don, do you think this so-called Generation Rent is growing up with kind of a mindset reminiscent of the Great Depression, the Depression era people, World War II generation, where they grew up with that sort of privation, saving, you know, getting by, that highly disciplined kind of financial outlook?
I think there's elements of that, but I also think there's still a huge chunk of entitlement, so that if in the Depression it's, well, we got to make ends meet, so you get what job you can, you work your way up as you can. Now it's, well, I can't get the job I want, so I'll maybe go to grad school or I'll go camp out at Occupy Wall Street or something like that. That's not to disparage all of the young people, but I think there's a lot less of that, I'm going to do whatever it takes to grow and get my life, you know, even in bad economic times, moving.
Terry, apparently some 40% of college graduates in a survey said recently that the student loan debt that they have incurred to get their degrees is causing them to delay these major purchases, a house, a car, etc. And generally those kinds of purchases, particularly home purchases, are an indicator of future economic well-being, people grounding themselves in some kind of investment that will hopefully appreciate over time. So if you have this wide swath of people who are not doing that purchasing, does that act as a depressing factor in home prices, for instance, which have already been beaten up?
Yeah, it does in the short term. In the long term, it doesn't. I mean, it may not necessarily. If we can turn around the economy at some point and have rational policies that will bring economic growth and job creation rather than stagnation, I think, you know, things could turn around rather suddenly. We talked about this earlier generation, the Depression generation, of which my parents were both members. And you know, they went through a long 10-year period there where there was virtually no economic growth, and then a war in which they both served. And when they got out, they were very eager to get back into civilian life and start consuming. And they did. They became champion consumers, even when they didn't have any money. But you know, so I would expect this generation to follow that same path. At some point, the opportunities will present themselves. But right now, it's just a very bad atmosphere.
All right, Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke made some comments about the student loan issue to a room full of teachers recently. Let's see what he had to say.
So burden on future consumers and fiscal burdens for future taxpayers, those are some of the reasons to try to use debt wisely. I don't think that student debt is a, again, you never know, but I don't think it's a financial stability issue to the same extent that, say, mortgage debt was in the last crisis, because most of it is held not by financial institutions, but by the federal government.
From the man who didn't see any problem with the real estate market. There's no problem with the housing bubble. Circa 2006, 2007, he didn't see any problems. Do you agree with the point he's making, which is that instead of banks holding this debt, largely the government is holding this debt, so when it blows up in everyone's face, it won't be a problem?
He's exactly incorrect. I mean, and in 2008, I think he was on record as saying, I don't see a big problem with the mortgage problem with mortgages for very much the same reason.
And they were also backed up by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Half,
so I don't see
half
what
of the $12 trillion $12 trillion housing market, $6 trillion or so, was backed by Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. So, you know, even at that time, it was a massive government intervention, and it didn't keep it from collapsing. Quite the contrary, repeated government interventions and ineptitude have made it worse than it needed to be.
You know, Don, Obama has made noises here and there about the idea of forgiving student debt or reducing their balances to give these young people a better chance at entering the world without all this suffering. And if the government holds the debt, I'm sure, you know, Obama could be considered chief loan officer. What do you think of that?
I mean, economically, I mean, what a disaster that would be, because all it means is shifting the costs under people who didn't voluntarily choose to assume that debt. But I mean, just think about what that teaches people morally. It's that, no, you don't have to bear responsibility for your choices. Other people are going to bear responsibility for your choices. Well, what's going to happen in the future? I mean, why not take out as much money as you can, continue trying to run up your debts as high as you can, because after all, in this country, we're not going to hold anybody to their agreements unless they're successful, in which case you're held to your agreements and everybody else's.
Terry, I'll give you last word on this in terms of the student loan bubble, loan debt bubble. How do you see this playing out? Do you see there being a pop of this bubble, and what would that mean? Does it mean that people are not going to have the money to go to college? Does it mean that who's not going to get paid back, and what are the real world sort of consequences?
Yeah, I think most people, if you look at student loans, most people still pay off their student loans. The average student loan indebtedness when they get out of college is about $20,000. You know, a new car, essentially. That's, you know, something I think anybody who gets a job could probably handle that. You know, but the big question is, I think the one that Don pointed to, and that is going down the road, what kind of society are we creating where people can just simply walk away from their debts and no longer be responsible for anything they do, and we just make everybody responsible for our own irresponsibility? That's a pretty bad society, I think, and we've seen in other places it doesn't work.
All right, guys, good talk. For Terry and Don, I'm Allen Barton. You've been watching Front Page.